It's only a matter of time before the next Pope is a woman. Likewise, the Archbishop of Canterbury, I have an intuition the next one could be a woman. And maybe even, perhaps not the next, but the one after, President of the United States. Now, I know I'm optimistic, but I think even the exercise of thinking this way is creative for us to understand the nature of power. I want to explore power today, and I want to make a contrast between two models of power: the power of holding on and the power of letting go. The scenarios I've painted already about a female pope, female Archbishop of Canterbury, or a female president are not meant to be token exercises. This is not another trendy Anglican theologian trying to be more feminist than the feminists. It's an exercise of putting ourselves in a position where we think about familiar things in a different way. Historically, our governments and our churches have been dominated by men. And within those institutions, there's been a certain style or practice of power that we could characterise as entitlement. We know of presidents who have a sense of entitlement. We know of popes and bishops who have had a sense of entitlement. Now, there are many ways of explaining the meaning of entitlement, but suffice to say, it is the power of holding onto something, exercising a certain privilege to control, to keep in check. We can see signs of this not only in political and ecclesial circles, but also in intimate partner violence. The majority of violence perpetrated in domestic situations is by men, and often those men are characterised by a sense of entitlement, of the power or the privilege of holding control over somebody else. And usually only violence bursts out when that privilege or that so-called right of holding control over someone else is threatened. So there is a particular style of exercising power that we can see both in private and public spheres, in the church and in politics. And I'm characterising it as the power of entitlement. And this power is fundamentally the power of holding onto control, the privilege of having control over others. Today, we are acknowledging and celebrating the significance of Mary Magdalene. A remarkable story presented, I'm thinking especially in the Gospel of John, and it presents to us a very different kind of power, the power of letting go. Let's just reflect for a moment upon Mary Magdalene. Now, in the Christian scriptures, there are a number of Marys, and they're often conflated. But Mary Magdalene has a unique position. Arguably, she's the first or the superior apostle in the early church. She's the first witness to the resurrection. And in the early church, it's apparent that she was given respect and authority for her position. After the Christian scriptures had come to a close and centuries on, it was quite obvious that the early churches felt uncomfortable with the respect, with the esteem given to Mary Magdalene, that a number of almost defamatory stories emerged about her, culminating with Gregory the Great in the 6th century. But if we go back to the Gospel of John, and in particular John chapter 20, we see some really important things going on which underline the status of Mary Magdalene as a leader in the church. But let's unpack the story, and in so doing, we'll see that there are two strands to it. The story, of course, in the Gospel of John is compiled for a Christian community towards the end of the first century. So whilst we associate the events with around 29 in the year 29 of the Common Era, these stories come together in the Gospel of John for a Christian community towards the end of the first century. And a number of stories are drawn together. There are basically two groups of stories associated with the resurrection of Jesus. There's the so-called appearance stories, and they're stories which are usually presented in the context of men, that is, that men are witnesses to the appearance stories. These stories then, of course, are reassuring to later Christian communities that the crucifixion of Jesus was not the end of the story. Here we have these appearance stories which resonate very powerfully about the ongoing presence of the risen Christ. But there's another collection of stories that are associated with women, what we call the empty tomb stories. So in this case with Mary Magdalene, we have her approaching the empty tomb. She approaches it in the dark, disconsolate, uncertain. The whole atmosphere is quite remarkable, really. Something about the darkness, emptiness, evocative of the failure of the crucifixion, that Jesus' cause had ended in disaster. And so in a sombre and studied setting, she approaches the empty tomb. But to her amazement, she encounters the risen Christ. And in a remarkable interaction, where she is the privileged one to experience this encounter, in this remarkable interaction, the risen Jesus implores of her, do not hold on to me. She had to let go. She's had this potentially transformative experience, this remarkable encounter. And the response from the risen Jesus is not celebrate, let's acknowledge this great event, but let go. And it's on the basis of her exercising the power of letting go that her own transformation is complete. And then she takes up and fulfills her vocation as the apostle to the apostles. Let's just reflect then for a moment on some of these, the important elements in this story. First of all, the story begins in the dark, in ambiguity. There's no clear black or white resolution of the situation. In that situation, Mary approaches the tomb disconsolate, uncertain, wondering, daunted by the whole context. And then there is this remarkable experience of amazement, of wonder, an encounter, a theophany, an epiphany, where something remarkable has happened in her place and it changes her perspective. And because her perspective has changed, because she's had this new experience, she sees things differently. She feels things differently. And she exercises the power of letting go, and the transformative experience that began is completed in her life. What I'm suggesting today is that a number of things really about Mary Magdalene. That first and foremost, she was a leader in the early church. There's no doubt that she was a significant figure. But second, and just as important, is that the nature of her experience. And in that experience, she exercised the power of letting go. And this power of letting go not only enabled her to become the leader in the early church, but to continue to be transformed by that extraordinary experience of amazement. Let's come back now for a moment to the image of the empty tomb. It's an evocative image. And it resonates with us because many of us know the experience of emptiness. It might be the emptiness that comes from an experience of grief. We have lost someone near and dear to us. We know the empty term. We know what it is to grieve for someone. It might come through an experience of illness. Perhaps we've been made, during the virus, we've been made redundant. We've got no money, we've got nothing. We've lost everything. We know the despair and the cruelty of those empty spaces. What emerges, though, from this story is that the empty tomb, this emptiness, is not the end, but it's the beginning. Mary Magdalene goes there, grieving, yearning, aspiring, searching, hoping. And in that experience of emptiness, in and through her own sense of yearning, she has this remarkable experience of encounter, of amazement. And because of that experience, she learns, or she's game enough to let go, in order that this experience of transformation, which is promised, begins to take root in her own life. We know the empty spaces. It's part of being human to try and grapple and deal with emptiness. For all sorts of reasons, for reasons of fear or threat, within our societies, within our churches, within our politics. Generally, but not always, generally men have learnt to deal with this experience of emptiness, or the threat of emptiness, the threat of being left with nothing, by developing a sense of entitlement. Entitlement, the power of holding on, the power of control. The sad irony, though, in exercising this power of control over others, in holding back power, it actually accentuates and intensifies the emptiness of human existence. It doesn't fill the void. In contrast, we have this remarkable person, Mary Magdalene, who enters the darkness, encounters the empty tomb, and is present there, is present in the absence, is present in a situation of complete despair and emptiness. But in that experience, in that waiting, in that expectation, in that yearning, in the experience of lamenting, the new begins. The new takes root in the emptiness of our lives. When we have given up on everything and everyone, in the empty space a seed of hope is sown. And this hope, this promise, this small epiphany, this experience of amazement allows us to open up and to exercise the power of letting go. And in exercising that power, in letting go, we are not only transformed, but we become sources of hope and courage and transformation for others. In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer and Sustainer. Amen.